Welcome, welcome, friends. Hope you're doing well wherever you're at. David here for this week's Griscom stream. Welcome. Got some things to get to. As always, appreciate all y'all tuning in live and the people coming in after the fact. If you are live, feel free to jump in with any questions or comments. I'm very happy to sort of take this whichever direction folks prefer. I always appreciate hearing from all of y'all. But yeah, no, got some stuff to get to. Hope y'all enjoyed our show. I really liked this last episode of Left Reckoning. Opened up debunking the race science myth and IQ, using none other than Christopher Hitchens to do that. And what's so funny about Hitchens, and I was saying this to Matt the other day, that maybe it's just because I studied philosophy in college, that I have a different, I just assume that most people want to have coherent worldviews, and you realize over time that that's really not the case. And a lot of the Hitchens fans, particularly the ones who sort of supported him because he was a right winger and because he was an atheist, solely because of that, they bring in a lot of weird politics. Hitchens, we all know who Hitchens is, right? Unapologetic supporter of one of the most disastrous and devastating recent activities of the United States government, which is the invasion of Iraq. Unforgivable for that. This is not about sort of cleaning up that record, but Hitchens spent a lot of his time, especially early on in his celebrity, being a voice for at least the kind of anti-war international movement. Anyways, I bring that up just to say that it's funny for all these people who sort of worship him, don't really spend a lot of time looking at what his positions were, even outside of politics, in the sense of international affairs, the things that he was writing about in the 80s and 90s. And what was funny about the clip that we pulled up, because Hitchens famously debated Charles Murray, who was just one of the OG think tank gremlins out there, somebody who pushed for race science, somebody who has way too much influence and is way too accepted in polite society than he should be. Hitchens debated him. Hitchens has always sort of been against, always was sort of against IQ and those kind of things. And it was so funny as we were sort of prepping and getting more clips and things to cite from, Hitchens' history on that, because so many of the people who really like IQ and people who do race science, they also love Christopher Hitchens. And it's probably not accidental knowing where Hitchens ended up, why those people got attracted to it. But it's very funny that you see all these people just completely oblivious as to what Hitchens' opinions on things race science and his opinion on things like IQ are. And it's pretty funny. We didn't feel like roasting some random, folks on Reddit or whatever. But all these people are just obsessed with trying to figure out what Christopher Hitchens' IQ was, which I don't know. Tickles me a bit knowing that he wrote not just one-off piece, but regularly talked about how he thought that not only the IQ was stupid, but the kind of people who are very obsessed with it usually aren't the most intelligent folks themselves. That was a lot of fun. So check that out if you missed it out earlier this week. Appreciate all of y'all hanging out. And again, feel free to jump in with any questions or comments. If I'm on a roll on a subject, I'll always come back to, so don't feel like you need to wait until there's a break to get some of those questions and topics in there. But before we get to some of this Biden stuff and a few of these other stories, I wanted to, show a video that y'all have seen this week before, or at least I hope you've seen it, because it makes me happy and it should make you happy. And we'll play this many, many times. This is Sean O'Brien of the Teamsters at the U.S. Senate this week, getting in a little scuffle with the senator from Oklahoma.
Senator, you've asked the
You're
question.
out of line,
Let him
man.
answer
Actually,
the
I haven't,
question.
and don't tell me I'm out
You
of line.
are out of line.
Don't tell me I'm out of line.
Well, you frame,
don't tell me. I'm
you
making
frame,
a
you
statement.
frame, you
Sir,
frame the statement
you need
like
to
a
shut
tough
your
guy.
mouth
Yeah.
because you don't know
You're
what
gonna tell me to
talking
shut my
about.
mouth?
Yes,
Yeah.
I did.
Hold it.
Yeah.
Hold it.
Yes, I
Tough
did.
guy. I'm not
Senator,
afraid of physical.
Senator,
You don't have
hold
to be,
it.
but don't sit there and tell me I'm out of line.
Because we
Sir,
hold,
that's
we
not-
hold greedy CEOs
That's
like yourself
not-
accountable.
You call me a greedy CEO.
Oh yeah, you are.
Yes.
You want to attack my salary? I'll attack yours. What
go
did you
ahead.
make? What did you make when you owned your company?
When I made my company, I kept my salary down at about $50,000 a year because I invested every penny into it.
Okay, all right. You mean you hid money?
No, I didn't hide. Oh, hold on a second.
Hell yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
He said that's out of line. You said
right,
I was out of line.
we're even.
We're not even. We're not even close to being even. You think it's smart? You think you're funny?
No,
you're not.
You think you're funny.
No, I never said. Did I
You
smile?
frame
Did I laugh?
your opening
Hold
statement.
on. Let's.
You frame your opening statement
No,
saying you're a tough
Senator,
guy.
continue.
This-
Senator, please
This is
continue your
behavior,
statements.
but sir, this is. I think it's great that you're doing this because
Me too.
this shows their behavior on how they try to come in and
No, I-
demonize a shop.
know.
No, it's
and
just-
they say about intimidation, and it's not about intimidation.
This
It's
may
not the
show your
employees
behavior
support.
here. But stay on the issue, please.
So one, want to see way more of that. I think it's great. Sean O'Brien, has brought a lot of life into the Teamsters, and be paying attention to what's happening in the Teamsters, particularly with this potential contract negotiation that might end in industrial action or strike coming up at the end of the summer, early fall. So definitely keep your eye out on Sean O'Brien and what's happening with the Teamsters. And I think there's been some pieces in Jacobin on it recently, really worthwhile. And of course, if you're not already following things like labor notes, you should be. But I wanted to hit on two things, right? One, because I think that's great. I think that's what we really need is for more unionists and union leaders to be going out there and being hostile with class enemies, like Mullen. But I wanted to hit on two things, just because obviously that clip was great. Let's not forget what was being talked about there. This is from the Teamsters press release on the hearing. Let's just make sure that the message isn't getting missed, and how awesome that exchange was. Teamsters General President Sean M. O'Brien testifies at Help Committee hearing. Today, Teamsters General President Sean M. O'Brien testified at a hearing held by the United States Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. The committee hearing, defending the right of workers to organize unions free from illegal corporate union busting, was initiated by Help Committee Chair Senator Bernie Sanders in response to unlawful anti-union activity at Starbucks, Amazon, and other multi-billion-dollar corporations. Quote, "There are no meaningful consequences for businesses and CEOs like Starbucks and Howard Schultz when they break our labor laws," O'Brien said. "When any employer, be they rail carriers, package companies, or coffee shops, gets away with repeated abuse of American workers, the legislators who let it happen are complicit in these crimes." And let's just say that again. The legislators who let it happen are complicit in. If you caught my piece in Jacobin last week on Joe Biden and the role that he played in Boyer Met's win in getting the workers to return to work in Alabama, one of the points that I made is that it's a very clear two-tier system when it comes to labor law in this country. The workers in Alabama, they lost the right to picket. They are harassed by police, all exercising their First Amendment fundamental rights there. The company was very clearly involved in shady union busting and strike breaking activity during the entirety of the strike. And who gets punished? Who gets scrutiny? It was the workers, right? From, for example, losing the right to picket to this, the ludicrous NLRB, decision saying that it was agreeing with with Boyer Met about the extent of the damages that the union might be liable to pay back to the company, which was just an astronomical sum and just completely nonsensical. The point here is that just like what we saw in Alabama with the coal strike to what we saw in Bessemer, Alabama with the potential Amazon union push there, Amazon broke the law as well. It comes out later that they broke the law. The NLRB says they broke the law, but Amazon's very happy to do that because what happens to them? Little slap on the wrist, mean a letter with some tough language in it. Doesn't scare them. They're not worried about that. But meanwhile, workers are constantly being not only left out to dry, oftentimes directly targeted by the state. You see Joe Biden locking arms with Republicans to block the right of these workers to strike in the railroad industry, who were warning about exactly the same kind of thing that happened in East Palestine. It's a two-tiered system. And you see with Howard Schultz, who is somebody who thinks he's above the law, somebody who's refusing to testify about his illegal activities. Yeah, Sean O'Brien's right. And good for him for going out there and, not backing down and saying what he said. I also just want to do a quick fact check, old school Trump style, on Mullen here, because what that whole exchange was about is Mark Wayne Mullen was doing a kind of typical right wing attack on unions, saying, they're all corrupt, they're just funneling money to their leadership, etc. Right? This is the classic argument. You don't want to pay your dues because you're just paying the salary of someone. And Insider did some fact checking for us here. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen ran a multi-million-dollar plumbing business and claimed he only took a $50,000 salary. And if you remember, Sean O'Brien said then if you were only taking that, then you were hiding money. And Business Insider says here, his financial statements show otherwise. Republican senator drastically understated how much money he made in the private sector as he argued with the head of the Teamsters union at a hearing in Washington on Wednesday. While lambasting Teamsters president Sean O'Brien for his nearly $200,000 salary, Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen claimed that he paid himself a salary of just $50,000, really, barely getting by when he ran a plumbing business. But his financial disclosures show his salary was nearly $92,000 in 2012. The year he was first elected to Congress. His total income was even greater. And it goes here to say Mullen said that they only made $50,000 because they invested every penny into it. But like many business owners, Mullen's biggest source of income wasn't his salary. He reported between $200,000 and $2 million in income in 2012 from two family companies, Mullen Plumbing Incorporated and Mullen Plumbing West, and another $15,000 to $50,000 from shares he held in a bank. In 2011, Mullen also made well over $50,000. His salary was over $77,000, and his other income from the same two businesses was also over $200,000. He also reported over $50,000 in rent that year from Mullen Properties. Mullen's office didn't respond to a request for comment. Right? I mean, surprising that a Republican and a CEO is going to lie like that. No, but good to know. Good to know that this guy is willing to just straight up lie in the United States Senate at a hearing while attacking somebody who represents Teamsters who are fighting for their lives against extreme corporate greed themselves. Pretty classic. I mean, and you hear this all the time. Companies going, CEOs going on, I don't make much money. I invest every penny. It's like, you pay yourself a marginal salary. You own those significant resources. You're fine, right? You're not like the whole oh, poor me, I'm a CEO who's not getting by is just such a bullshit argument. Anyone who knows anything about business knows that these people are full of it. And just because, one filing or one part of the income that he's getting is only saying he's making $50,000 when he's pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars from other things that he's doing, all while also increasing his already sizable net worth over the past few years, right? It's just, it's nasty, it's stupid, and nobody should fall for it. And even more important, as Secret Asian Dan says, $50,000 is a tax dodge, which I think was also a pretty excellent point there by Sean O'Brien. And again, too, no need for salary when you have other capital to support yourself and can always borrow against your equity. That's another point, too. They borrow out against their equity, so they got money in the bank. They got, this guy's not living a $50,000 a year lifestyle. Just nonsense from these assholes. So hell yeah, Teamsters. Let's see more of that in the near future. Yeah, and he sold his business for millions later as well. All right, well, let's. I want to get to this Biden story, but before we get there, let's play one more quick video because I want to make sure that we're upping this as much as possible. Not trying to be alarmist, but like people should be really worried when they're hearing the rhetoric that's coming from the right, coming from people like Dan Crenshaw, coming from Republicans, coming from Fox News about potential action in Mexico. And, if the actual chest thumping that you're getting from people like Bill Barr, people like Dan Crenshaw isn't worrying enough, the complicity and the willingness of many in the liberal press to go along with the attacks on AMLO and attacks on Mexican sovereignty should really give you pause, right? I know these things always seem like they can't happen, but these things can escalate really, really quickly. And central to that has been this kind of media push that we've been getting in the United States to paint AMLO, the president of Mexico, somebody who holds tremendous amounts of support, somebody who overwhelmingly won his presidential election, is regularly able to sort of muster up shows of support from the Mexican people, is always being sort of attacked in the American press as some kind of dictator in waiting, right? I don't know. Popular president who wins his elections by significant margins, who opens himself up to a recall vote in the middle of his term, right? That the right boycotts, right? Because they don't believe in it. No, they boycott because they know they're going to lose. AMLO over here uh, has been, pushing back against these attacks, and the whole thing is now the INE, right? The election commission in Mexico, that all of these liberals and people like David Frum are so worried about. Again, an institution that has historically been dominated by the right, that is very, very hostile to AMLO and AMLO's parties, even going so far as barring candidates from AMLO's party running for governor elections. Governor elections, by the way, when they had governor elections recently in Mexico, Morena, AMLO's party, won overwhelmingly all across the country. Right, this is the kind of last rallying cry for an out of touch elite that can't win power in Mexico electorally. So they're hoping that maybe they can get some action and play from an American audience who's very, very willing to listen to the voices of the rich and powerful instead of to the voices of working people. If you want more on that, I interviewed Kurt Hackbarth on GTA on Monday. But here's a quick video from AMLO sort of responding to some of these attacks, and I think he does a great job here. I snagged this from Ben Norton, who's been doing a great job covering this as well.
Aprovecho para contestarle al Departamento de Estado del Gobierno de Estados Unidos, que como es la mala costumbre, siempre se inmiscuyen en asuntos que no les corresponden. Todavía no abandonan la política de hace 2 siglos, la política de Monroe, de sentirse el gobierno del mundo. ¿Qué le digo con todo respeto al señor Blinken del Departamento de Estado? Que hay más democracia actualmente en México que en Estados Unidos. En vez de estarse metiendo, actuando de manera injerencista en nuestros asuntos, si quieren seguir con la misma política, pues que se ocupen de lo que está pasando en el Perú, donde ahí la embajadora de Estados Unidos es la asesora de los golpistas que pisotearon las libertades y la democracia en ese país, destituyendo injustamente al presidente y encarcelándolo. Pero esto no es nada más el Departamento de Estado, es la naturaleza, la costumbre que viene de siglos en el gobierno de Estados Unidos y en las élites de Estados Unidos. Cuando hablo de que tenemos más democracia nosotros que ellos, es porque aquí gobierna el pueblo, allá gobierna la oligarquía. Este periódico y otros en Estados Unidos protegen a las mafias de poder económico en el mundo.
I mean, you can't argue too much with AMLO there. If the United States government was very worried about democracy, you would see them, being much more interested in, exactly what's been happening in Peru, with something that's very clearly a coup at this point. But no, they're worried about Mexico, where they're trying to make the electoral system work better. They're trying to expand the vote and make it easier for Mexican migrants who have left the country to be able to vote in the country. Right? That's what That's why the right's pissed. They don't want migrants who have been suffering under economic hardships in the country of Mexico from being able to vote there, right? They want to get worked up about, oh my lord, the salary of some of the highest paid people in the country, people who are very, very well off compared to normal working people in the country of Mexico, right? Oh, but these people, their salaries might be cut, right? It's nonsense. It's been nonsense from the get-go. And I think it's good to see AMLO sort of, standing on his own 2 feet there. Not that he doesn't typically. He's also said that he's gonna, if the GOP in the U.S. doesn't stop attacking Mexican um, sovereignty, that he's going to start running campaigns in the U.S. to encourage people to vote against the Republican Party, which is pretty. Which is pretty solid as well. But again, if you want anything more in depth than that, you guys can check out on GTA Ben show, give them an argument. I spoke with Kurt Hackbarth for like an hour on this. Kurt also has an excellent piece in Jacobin. Let me get that title for y'all. I think it's like, no, almost not threatening Mexican democracy, which thank God he wrote it, because the coverage of Mexico in America in English is just unbelievably awful. It truly does blow my mind sometimes, just how biased the things that they get away with for a country, again, that like we share a border with. Our ability to be able to get accurate information about Mexico, it should be a lot easier than it is. And instead, you get these kind of people who spend all of their time with the elites and the wealthy and the powerful in Mexico, obviously skewing all of their reporting on what's going on in the country, right? Because what is the answer when all you read in the American press is how AMLO's a dictator, AMLO's undemocratic, to the fact that the Mexican people overwhelmingly support AMLO, right? The dictatorship that they're talking about is actually that people are having much more influence over their government than they did under the PAN or under the PRI, right? That's the crisis of democracy. The crisis of democracy is not about people being able to influence their government, but how influential elites and the powerful and the rich are in Mexico. And that's the crisis that they're all worked up about. And we should be clear about what that is. But again, folks, feel free to throw in some questions. I definitely am going to make sure that we talk a bit about this Biden story, because I think that he's not getting enough heat for it. But feel free to jump in there with any questions or comments, and I'll get to them. I'll try to answer a couple now if there's any in there. But even if I'm going on a thing about Biden, feel free to just ask them, and I'll come back around to him if I miss him the first go. T King says, David, with the new pink tide in Bolivia, Mexico, Brazil, and other places, which Latin American pink tide leader has the most PTE? I'm still Team Lula for that. I'd have said Evo. But yeah, he's more in the background now. I mean, I think it's still Lula. Lula's ability to play on the world stage, I think, is unmatched. I think it's great. I mean, it's been really great to see Brazil continue to join. Also, don't forget Colombia as well, in trying to normalize and rebuild relationships with Venezuela, a country that the United States has been trying to push into a corner and ostracize from their own neighbors. Lula, Celso Amorim was there meeting with Maduro recently. That's great. I think that trying to build peace and brotherhood and cooperation in that part of the world is something that's desperately needed, and very happy for Lula's ability to do that. But you can't completely underestimate AMLO. I mean, also just being clear, like AMLO too is like not necessarily a socialist. He's like a developmentalist left, like populist, right? He wants to do some development in Mexico. He's not somebody who I think is like has his aim of his presidency being the eradication of capital, but he wants to see poor people do better than they are. He wants to see democracy being expanded, right? Different project from mine, but I certainly know that all the attempts from the right in Mexico and all of the attempts from the ruling class in the United States to undermine that project, if that is successful, that is not going to cultivate an environment that is going to be more open for more explicitly anti-capitalist and socialist politics in Mexico. But AMLO's willingness to sort of start pushing back against Biden, his refusal, to go to the Summit of the Americas a few months back, I think was good. I think, it's important not to overestimate symbolic gestures like that. But I mean, if we're just talking about energy, that's some good energy for sure. Oh yeah, and the lithium, no doubt about it. Lithium, electricity. AMLO's trying to work, do more in sort of privileging state-owned, electric system over private-owned, and that's another. Oh, this destruction of democracy. We're not letting capitalists bilk and make as much money off of the public as possible. What a crisis, right? It's just like you got to read between the lines. The headlines say one thing, and most people only get headlines, so that's just what you're casually absorbing, right? For somebody who's like, oh, I'm not that interested in Mexico, I'm going to go on to the next. I'm going to go and read about January 6th again. But they're just seeing that headline. Oh, AMLO dictator, AMLO dictator, AMLO dictator. And that's like the real, even more than even the reporting sometimes, I think, just like how frequent those kind of headlines are. But then you read the piece again and it's like, oh, AMLO is, challenging a body that is trying to deny members of a party that's very popular in the country right now from running over just nonsensical, silly, not dotting your I's and crossing your T's kind of stuff. Dictator. Nationalizing lithium, dictator. Trying to privilege state-owned electricity companies over the private corporations, dictator, right? You start to read between the lines or even just read the pieces because they're pretty explicit, honestly. It becomes clear, but it's about that kind of like quantity over quality strategy that you get in the U.S. media when it comes to Mexico. Yeah, no, I mean, if you missed it, Dan Arcus, we just, unless it's a new one, we just played that video that was from Ben Norton, who's been doing a good job putting that kind of stuff out there. So, yeah, you want to get some BDE in here. Biden should extradite Bolsonaro, though. Hey, I think, good potential something happening in Brazil would be even better. But that would be the ultimate kind of picking the wrong horse in Bolsonaro, sort of cozying up to Trump, who wants nothing to do with him now. Um, somebody who, like himself, was going to fall out of power after one term. Would be pretty funny if Biden did that. And our friend Champagne Comey says on AMLO, his main focus is doing the realistic things possible in Mexico, taking the next step possible in a left direction without scaring people, and he's absolutely succeeding. Yeah, I mean, this is the space that he's operating in. I just think that it's it's important to be clear about what we think of people. Like, it's called critical support, right? That's what it is. In the sense of like, let's not just spend all of our time fawning over politicians who oversee brutal systems and make decisions that harm people, but also recognizing that some of these things are setting up even more positive outcomes in the future. Schultze, I mean, ask this. People ask this all the time. I ask Kurt. I mean, really, more than anything, there's some writers out there that you can read. Kurt is somebody who's a great resource. But no, they're like, as far as I know, and if there are some that I don't know about, I would love to, let us know. But there's not as much English language coverage of Mexico in that kind of holistic sense. That's sort of breaking down what's really happening there. It's a lot of kind of propaganda stuff and New York Times style. Both sides and all the sides just happen to live in Mexico City and be rich. Stuff like that. Unfortunately, I mean, it would be a great thing. As something I would 100% support. But all right, I'll come back for questions in a second. But I have to talk a bit more about this Biden bit. This the name of the video, And it's just it's something that like it truly infuriates me to see what these folks can get away from. People have seen some of the new facilities that they're building up for detention of folks. Yes, unlike Trump, there won't be separation, but mothers will be able to sit in a detention cell with their children. That is effectively a prison. Um, Biden has not done what he promised to do when it comes to Trump's immigration policies. In many ways, he's actually making certain aspects of them permanent. Um, People remember this is 2020 discourse, right? You can't criticize Biden because we have to get Biden in so that Biden can reverse the flow of all the damage that Trump's doing. And I still think that I don't think that it's the same thing in the general sense. But Lord in heaven, did that get overstated? Lord in heaven, was that a shield that was used to try to block legitimate criticism of the Democratic Party and what Biden's policies and practices have been in the past, and also people's very serious and now correctly, proven doubts about how committed Joe Biden was going to be to undoing the work of Donald Trump. When Biden was a candidate in 2020, he tweeted out, "Children should be released from ICE detention with their parents immediately. This is pretty simple, and I can't believe I have to say it. Families belong together." Biden is now going to be continuing the work of Donald Trump. Of course, as I said earlier, Biden is considering reinstating detention systems of migrant families. And yes, the nice version of it is that maybe they won't be separating kids from their mothers at the border, but putting them all in a cell together. That's the humanism there. But I want to talk about asylum, right? Because that's one that is just so simple when it comes down to it. What's going on here? Joe Biden is continuing the Trump policies of restricting asylum. And let's not forget here that asylum is something that's very clear cut in American law. This is quote, U.S. law, any alien physically present in the United States or at a land border or a port of entry, irrespective of such alien's status, can apply for asylum. That's it. Cut and dry. If you are coming to this country and you are claiming asylum, that has to be processed. We do not turn people away. That changed under Trump. Trump tried a bunch of different things. Many of them got caught up in court and then was finally successful with Title 42, one of the most cynical uses of the COVID-19 pandemic to be as barbarous as possible on our border. For people who don't remember, it's cooked up by the white nationalist Stephen Miller to basically say if migrants come into this country, they're going to spread COVID-19. So because of the powers that the executive branch has to try to block a kind of health pandemic, we're going to supersede U.S. law on asylums, and we are basically going to be able to turn people away from them. Biden inherits this, says he doesn't like it, says he's going to get rid of it, slow rolls it. He gets gummed up in the courts, right? And never really put a head first attempt to try to break this brutal policy from being practiced in the U.S. Side note on COVID-19, remember COVID-19 is also what Greg Abbott is using to brutalize people on the border as well, right? It just is something that's very, it's just notable how effective COVID-19 has been utilized by the right and now by, inherited by Biden and utilized by people like Greg Abbott to brutalize people on the border. Greg Abbott doesn't give a shit about COVID-19. He never did, right? In fact, the only time he brings it up now is to say that he wants to outlaw any kind of health practices from ever being utilized in the state of Texas, except for his emergency declaration act that gives him tremendous powers and leeway to basically subvert localities, to redirect funding. He's been utilizing, Operation Lone Star. If you don't know the term, that's what the name for his border operation is. He's been taking COVID-19 funding from the federal government that's been provided from the states to alleviate people's suffering and utilizing that to brutalize people on the U.S. border. Right? Trump did the same thing. Biden inherited, continues. Again, Biden has said time again, even last month, saying, I don't like Title 42. But going to continue to oversee that system, right? We can say whatever. Oh, the courts are making it difficult for him, right? It's not just Biden. Kristen Sinema, Mark Kelly, Joe Manchin, Raphael Warnock, and Maggie Hassan have joined Republicans to introduce bills to continue to preserve Title 42 policy, which again is a cynical and racist use of COVID-19 to subvert very clear, simple American law when it comes to asylum in this country. Right? You're not going to get starry-eyed stuff from me on this kind of thing, but that's a very basic American tenet: is that if you are fleeing your country, you are welcome here, right? Probably one of the better traditions, even if it's been practiced in a brutal way, even if the United States is oftentimes responsible for the dislocation of people, right? It's like a kind of value that like you should want to see in a society, that you accept people who are fleeing hardship and difficulty and dangers to their lives and dangers to their family. But Biden turns his back on this, and certainly Trump did as well. So Title 14 is now set to end in May. But Joe Biden, not wanting to be attacked by the right, or maybe because he doesn't want to see more asylum seekers in the U.S., is effectively making is setting up a permanent asylum ban in this country, or making it much more difficult to get asylum in this country. And he's using that by outlining these new rules. So these new rules say that you need to apply for asylum where you are, and you do so, by the way, on a smartphone, an app. I couldn't imagine a more dystopian thing than the fact that Joe Biden, under his leadership right now, is saying there's an app for that. We're going to have people who are in poverty, who are running from dangerous conditions where they live, again, oftentimes created by U.S. foreign policy, right, or the privation of U.S. capital in those countries. You can get an app, and then you can be put on a waiting list, and you just got to hang out until maybe you get your turn, and you can have a meeting with CPB. The app has been riddled, as I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by, riddled with errors, difficulties. There's been particular difficulties with the facial recognition on the app, particularly with people who have complexions that are a little bit darker than mine. So people's faces aren't being recognized, booting them out of the app. They're just sort of stuck in this bureaucratic nightmare, right? Where we're denying our fundamental commitment. Again, something that is clearly laid out in U.S. law. You have to go through the developer, hope that the app works, right? Nice. You have to stay where you are. Additionally, to basically making this app program be how we process asylum, capping the amount of asylum cases that we're accepting at any period of time. They are also implementing something that Trump implemented, which is called the transit ban, right? A transit ban means stay where you are, right? If you were in Honduras, if you're in El Salvador, if you're in Venezuela, you don't leave. And if you do come to the U.S. southern border, the Biden administration is saying you have to go and apply at a country in between the United States and where your country of origin, right? Knowing full well that people, entering into El Salvador, entering into Nicaragua, entering into Honduras, and entering into Mexico are not going to be processed by those countries. Basically saying door shut to you, right? And this extends, to Cuba, right? This extends to, Venezuela. It's absolutely dystopian, brutal. This was a Trump policy that liberals rightfully said was wrong. They said this is inhumane, this is un-American, etc. But now Biden is not only, was he taking 3 years to deal with Title 42, again, an absolutely brutal dystopian law or order. He's making a permanent system, right? Because Title 42 is going to expire in May, according to the Biden administration. And this is what will replace it, right? Which, again, is effectively a ban or a severe restriction on asylum seekers coming into this country, right? And as I said, I'll read it again just to be really clear. This is not my like nice squishy interpretation of the law. This is the law. Hear it. What does it say? It says an alien physically present in the United States or at a land border or port of entry, irrespective of such alien status, can apply for asylum. But we're not doing that. We're putting people in queues where people are now getting stuck on the northern border of Mexico, on the Mexican side, in difficult conditions with not, other than like NGOs and certain groups trying to help folks out, with very little resources to be able to get by, where they are preyed upon by cartels, they are preyed upon by traffickers, they're preyed upon by criminals, all while just sort of languishing away and hoping that they get a nice message on the fucking app that the Joe Biden administration has put out. An app, again, that is filled and riddled with issues. But even if the app wasn't faulty, what Biden is doing is an affront to the American asylum system that we have set up in this country. It is truly brutal. It is a very clear mimicking of Trump policies that people thought were disgusting when Trump did it. And now Biden is doing it. And I want to be clear here because I think it's important to say, give credit where credit's due. It has not been the case that every member of the Democratic Party has been silent on this. It is not the case that even all the members of like the liberal media, if we want to call it that, right? Vox and things like that, have been silent on it. People have been critical of Biden, but it has certainly not boiled up to, a major issue for a lot of people. A lot of people are very happy to look the other way when Joe Biden is continuing the policies of Donald J. Trump. And beyond this, and there has been already suffering under this system that is very, very young. Texas Monthly had a long piece about it, and they highlighted one young man from Cuba who was stuck in the northern border in Mexico. And while they were there waiting for their turn on the app, he was shot and killed. Right. So people have already died because of this policy. It is brutal. It is inhumane. And then you also have the quote unquote like solutions, right? Which is Harris's. You all remember Kamala Harris. Do not come. Do not come. Their partnership for Central America, which is nothing. It's a grab bag for United States multinational corporations. That's what it is. It's not aid based, right? It's a grab bag for American multinational corporations, so that the United States, for the U.S. to sort of support their activities in countries that have already been ransacked by private international capital, along with just the long history of American imperialism, which has left a lot of these countries, extremely shaky, right? There's a reason that people are fleeing. And remember too, that like, I think that sometimes when we talk about the asylum and the border crisis on this, remember that a lot of these people who are seeking asylum aren't coming from Mexico, right? There's a whole other conversation to have about our relationship with Mexico and migration. But a lot of these are people fleeing, Southern Central America and countries like Venezuela and Cuba, right? So even on that level, I think it's just important to know that this crisis is something that is accelerated in the past decade, right? And we all know about the brutality that people have faced in recent years under Trump and in the early Biden administration. We also know what was happening in the 2010s during the Obama administration, and we know the long history of Central America and the U.S. role in destabilizing countries across the region. It's brutal. It's nasty. It's disgusting. And Joe Biden should not be able, to get away with this kind of thing. And I bring this up because I find it to be absolutely abhorrent. And I think that if you were upset about what Trump was doing, you should be very upset about what Joe Biden is doing. I also bring it up to talk about like election discourse, right? Because every fucking time these two parties put up one goal versus another, two people who want to maintain and manage the same system, some of my friends, they make, and I understand why, and I get it, these arguments about like, okay, who's going to be the least worst option, right? And I get it. I get defensive voting. I understand it as a strategy. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong or it's not something that you should participate in. But this fucking cacophony of nonsense out here, that acting like these people are sort of wanting to manage and maintain the same kind of systems of brutality, is some kind of ultra position or wrong, or propagandized. You're seeing it play out right now. You're seeing the consequences, right? And you see it all across the board. You're seeing it with Biden and SNAP benefits in this country, right? You're seeing it with Medicaid, right? These people want to administer the same brutal system. And I'm tired of all of the excuses that people make to say the American people are too stupid to be able to listen to the arguments against, this brutality. I had some stuff from Beto that I wanted to play. Maybe I'll save that for another show in the near future. He had an interesting interview with David Axelrod, that I'd like to play some of the stuff, maybe recap how he lost, and some of the points that he made. But he made some interesting points about immigration. And one thing that I agree with him on, actually, is that when it comes to immigration, the Republicans have a very easy message, which they say, build the wall, right? Blah, blah, blah. Hateful, disgusting. Democrats tie themselves in knots trying to basically administer just slightly better versions of Republican policy because they don't want to be attacked for being soft on the border or being soft on immigration or whatever, right? And it doesn't matter politically for the Democrats because it doesn't matter. Like Joe Biden basically making permanent a form of Title 42 in the U.S. is not going to win him any Republican votes. He's not going to go up against Donald Trump and say, well, actually, Donald Trump, I took a page out of your playbook and I'm also going to stop asylum seekers from coming to the United States, right? He's never going to win that. So the political argument of like, oh, this is cynical, but we're going to, basically this has to happen, right? Is nonsense. This is exactly the time to have some goddamn backbone and stand up and say, we're not going to do this anymore. So folks, I have to run because Matt and I have to record really quickly, but I'm going to, because I told folks I would, I might try to do a kind of rapid fire through any of these questions, see if I can get to any of them, but I might not be able to. Apologies. But, I do these every week. So if I miss you this week, we can always do it again next one. Makogi, right, says, yeah, poor people driven away from home will just use the immigration app while they're waiting for their Grubhub. I know, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? And even for the ones who do get access to it, it doesn't work. Let's see. And if folks want to, on another subject too, Matt and I had a pretty long discussion about Marianne Williamson and, some of the questions and concerns and also some of the defenses of, that move. It's up for patrons now as our post game. You can access that patreon.com/left reckoning. I was pretty proud of that conversation. I think we sort of worked through that fairly well. And I'm curious what people think. I haven't heard too much back yet, other than people saying it was excellent and the best thing they've ever heard. Yeah, folks. I mean, again, I would be happy to stay in chat. I usually do. But I know Matt's actually waiting for me right now. So we can record some other stuff. We'll be back this Sunday with a bonus episode next Tuesday, 6 Central. Remember, we're doing it at 6 Central from now on. Tuesday evenings. Appreciate all of y'all. Take care and look out for each other.